G'day guys, thought I'd give you a little bit of an update on my Pinched Pony Pale Ale. So basically, day 5 I think, it's not day 5 now, but day 5 there was pretty much the airlock went exactly like that. Okay, so completely settled out both ends, which most of the time means very little activity, but doesn't always mean that. So I took 2 gravity readings over about 3 days, and it ended up high. So it bottomed out at 19, so 1.019, and the original gravity was 5.6, I think. So roughly almost a 5% beer. So that is still a success in my books. Well, of course it is. I mean, I've got beer, and the gravity readings tasted absolutely gorgeous. So the yeast worked, but it bottomed out high. Now, there's a few things that could happen there. It could have either been, as I did my research prior, and a couple of my friends mentioned it as well. A lot of craft breweries, what they'll do is they won't necessarily use the main yeast that was used in primary fermentation to bottle condition their beers. They may basically, transfer the beer and use a different yeast to bottle condition to prime the bottles. So you're still getting a secondary fermented bottle. You're still getting a naturally carbonated beer, but they may not be using the exact same yeast that they use for primary fermentation. There's lots of reasons why they do that. Sometimes that can help with consistency of the product, but sometimes as well they may not want to give away the secret of the particular yeast that they use in primary fermentation, and a good way around that is to use a completely different yeast just for bottling. So there's a few reasons why this may have ended up high. First thing, it may be simply that they used a different yeast to bottle condition, and the yeast that they use for the bottling condition process may have not really had the ability, or wasn't specifically cultured to fully bottom out, because its main culture, like the purpose behind them culturing that specifically, was just to carbonate the beer in the bottle. The other thing it could be is that maybe I do have the same yeast, and it's just that it may be a particular yeast that bottoms out higher on the hydrometer scale purely and simply to accentuate the beer. Could be for extra residual sweetness. Some yeasts actually deliberately bottom out higher, so they're specifically cultured for that purpose. That could be another reason. And the other thing which I'm thinking might be the case is that because I used 1 bottle and not 2, there may have not been enough cell count in the starter that I created to give a proper healthy fermentation for the yeast to flocculate out, and for it to go further down the hydrometer scale. But if you look at this, it has created a decent amount of trub. So the active fermentation was very healthy, very active. It's created, so it's like multiplied. We've got the mother cells budding off, the daughter cells budding off the sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to obviously keg this, I'm going to bottle some. But the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to obviously harvest this yeast. And then what I'll do is I will, with the harvested yeast, because it'll be thicker and more, there'll be more yeast, there'll be more, mother-daughter cells in there, brand new generation, I'm going to brew another batch on top of it. I'm going to collect the trub, I'll brew another batch, probably be a Cooper's IPA or something like that, and I'll use that yeast that I've scooped out, the harvested yeast, and I will just dump it straight in, and then I will take a gravity reading, and I'll take a final gravity, and we'll see if, because my cell count will naturally be higher with the next generation yeast sitting at the bottom there, if it goes further down in gravity, then that might answer the question that the cell count to start with for this particular batch was too low. But with what's in there, it should be fine if that's the problem. If it ends up being a decent amount of trub, healthy yeast, ferments out my next batch, but it still ends up at 19, it will either be the fact that the yeast was meant to do that, that's the particular strain, they particularly chose a strain that goes higher due to creating some residual sweetness in the beer, or it may be that I'm just simply culturing a yeast strain that was only used for the bottle conditioning process. So either way, it was a success. I actually mixed up some of the yeast in suspension to help with fermentation to see if that would work. It didn't work. It still remained the same, but as you can see here, it caused a lot of yeast in suspension, and it's slowly going down, it's slowly clear. You can see the difference there. Clear, cloudy. So I've actually just put some beer findings in there to help clear it up a little bit quicker, and then I'll be bottling and kegging, and everything should be sweet with the world. So the experiment was and is a success. It's made beer, it's made a 5% beer, it tastes amazing, the hop is just gorgeous, the flavour, the mouthfeel is just fantastic. It's just, the whole thing with the yeast has worked out fine. It's just a matter of me doing further experimentation and seeing whether or not the yeast that I harvest from here still has the same final gravity as this one here. If it does, then, as I said, the yeast, it's one or two things. The yeast is either meant to do that for the style that they wanted, because the IPA that I had, that came from the yeast that came from that bottle, had residual sweetness in it. So it may have been that just came from the amber that may have been present in there, or it may have been that the fact that they particularly liked the yeast that would actually bottom out higher, so there was some residual sweetness there. I do find that a little bit hard too as well, because the beer was so high in alcohol that you would naturally think that the yeast would flocculate out, and it would actually it would bottom out lower, like maybe 10. It should have gone down to maybe 12, 11, 10, or even 8, 9 or 8. So my theory might be completely thrown out the window with that, but you know what? This is what brewing's all about. I'm really excited. The beer tastes amazing. I've made beer. The yeast tastes fantastic. The yeast is actually relatively clean, because I'm getting all the flavour from the ingredients I put into the batch. So we'll check. I'm going to do one more experiment, see if the yeast goes well, and if it works out the way I want it to, then yeah, I'll be cultivating it, harvesting it even more. So cheers guys, thanks a lot for all your comments as well. Really happy with this experiment. Cheers.